Operation Pillar of Defense was an 8-day Israel Defense Forces operation in the Hamas-governed Gaza Strip, which began on 14 November 2012 with the killing of Ahmed Jabari, chief of the Gaza military wing of Hamas. The operation was preceded by a period with a number of mutual Israeli-Palestinian responsive attacks. According to the Israeli government, the operation began in response to the launch of over 100 rockets at Israel during a 24-hour period. An attack by Gaza militants on an Israeli military patrol jeep within Israeli borders, and an explosion caused by IEDs, which occurred near Israeli soldiers on the Israeli side of a tunnel passing under the Israeli West Bank barrier. The Israeli government stated that the aims of the military operation were to halt rocket attacks against civilian targets originating from the Gaza Strip and to disrupt the capabilities of militant organizations. The Palestinians blamed the Israeli government for the upsurge in violence, accusing the IDF of attacks on Gazan civilians in the days leading up to the operation. They cited the blockade of the Gaza Strip and the occupation of West Bank, including East Jerusalem, as the reason for rocket attacks. During the course of the operation, the IDF claimed to have struck more than 1,500 sites in the Gaza Strip, including rocket launch pads, weapon depots, government facilities, and apartment blocks. According to a UNHCR report, 174 Palestinians were killed and hundreds were wounded. Many families were displaced. One airstrike killed 10 members of the al-Dalu family. Some Palestinian casualties were caused by misfired Palestinian rockets landing inside the Gaza Strip. 8 Palestinians were executed by members of the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades for alleged collaboration with Israel. During the operation, Hamas, the al-Qassam brigades and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad further intensified the rocket attacks on Israeli cities and towns. In an operation codenamed Operation Stones of Baked Clay by the al-Qassam brigades, firing over 1,456 rockets into Israel, and an additional 142 which fell inside Gaza itself. Palestinian militant groups used weapons including Iranian-made Fajar-5, Russian-made Grad rockets, Qassams, and mortars. Some of these weapons were fired into Rishon LeZion, Beersheba, Ashdod, Ashkelon, and other population centers. Tel Aviv was hit for the first time since the 1991 Gulf War, and rockets were fired at Jerusalem. The rockets killed 3 Israeli civilians in a direct hit on a home in Kiryat Malachi. By the end of the operation, 6 Israelis had been killed, 240 were injured, and more than 200 had been treated for anxiety by Magen David Adom. About 421 rockets were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. Another 142 fell on Gaza itself, 875 fell in open areas, and 58 hit urban areas in Israel. A bus in Tel Aviv was bombed by an Arab Israeli, injuring 28 civilians. Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, and other Western countries expressed support for what they considered Israel's right to defend itself, or condemned the Hamas rocket attacks on Israel. China, Iran, Russia, Egypt, Turkey, and several other Arab and Muslim countries condemned the Israeli operation. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency session on the situation, but did not reach a decision. After days of negotiations between Hamas and Israel, a ceasefire mediated by Egypt was announced on the 21st of November. Both sides claimed victory. Israel said that it had achieved its aim of crippling Hamas's rocket-launching ability, while Hamas stated that Israel's option of invading Gaza had ended. According to Human Rights Watch, both sides violated the laws of war during the fighting. Etymology: Although the official English name of the operation is Pillar of Defense, the Hebrew name translates as Pillar of Cloud. Eaton Bachman, head of the IDF's North American media desk, explained that this usage refers to the pillar of cloud in the Bible that protected the Israelites during the Exodus and guided them to the Promised Land. The Hebrew Bible and the New Testament elaborate on the story, specifying that the pillar of cloud shielded the Israelites from the Egyptians' arrows and catapults. The analogy is thus to the Israel Defense Forces, which shielded Israeli citizens from rocket attacks. Hamas labeled its actions as Operation Stones of Shale. Background: the Gaza Strip is defined by the 1949 armistice lines following the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. About 1.1 of 1.5 million residents of Gaza are registered as refugees from the war. Egypt occupied Gaza from 1948 to 1967, and with the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, Israel became the occupying power. In 2005, then Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon unilaterally withdrew Israeli forces and settlements from the Gaza Strip. Nonetheless, the ICRC, the UN and various human rights organizations consider Israel to still be the de facto occupying power due to its control of Gaza's borders, airspace and territorial waters. The following year, Hamas won a majority of seats in the Palestinian legislative elections. The outcome disconcerted Israel, the United States and the Quartet, and they demanded Hamas accept all previous agreements, recognize Israel's right to exist, and renounce violence. When Hamas refused, they cut off aid to the Palestinian Authority. In mid-2006, an Israeli soldier was captured by Hamas in a cross-border raid. The United States, in response to Fatah moves in October 2006 to form a unity government with Hamas, tried to undo the elections by arming Fatah to overthrow Hamas in Gaza. Hamas preempted the coup and took complete power by force. Israel then defined Gaza as a hostile territory, forming no part of a sovereign state, and put Gaza under a comprehensive economic and political blockade, which also denied access to a third of its arable land and 85% of its fishing areas. It has led to considerable economic damage and humanitarian problems in Gaza. The overwhelming consensus of international institutions is that the blockade is a form of collective punishment and illegal. Israel maintains that the blockade is legal and necessary to limit Palestinian rocket attacks from the Gaza Strip on its cities and to prevent Hamas from obtaining other weapons. In late December 2008, a series of escalations culminated in Israel launching aerial and naval attacks on Gaza, and a few days later, a ground invasion. The conflict resulted in between 1,166 and 1,417 Palestinian and 13 Israeli deaths, with significant damage to infrastructure in Gaza. It ended with a unilateral ceasefire by Israel, followed by Hamas declaring a one-week ceasefire. After the 2008-2009 escalation, the two sides observed an informal and uneasy ceasefire. Although rocket fire from Gaza never completely stopped and Israel conducted raids in Gaza, the IDF noted a steady increase in the number of rockets fired into southern Israel by militant groups in Gaza. By 2011, there were 680, and in 2012, 797. Hamas demanded that Israel end the naval blockade of Gaza's coastline as a condition to end rocket fire. According to Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, the Israeli security forces killed 273 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip between the end of Operation Cast-Lead and the 30th of October 2012, 113 of whom were civilians not taking part in hostilities. is. According to Israeli security officials, Hamas, with aid from Iranian technical experts and the Sudanese government, smuggled into Gaza Iranian-made FAJR-5 rockets with increased range and lethality, placing the highly populated Israeli Central District and other metropolitan areas in range. However, the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Major General Ahmed Jabari, stated, "We haven't sent any weapons to Gaza because it is under blockade, but we are honored to announce that we gave them the technology of how to make FAJR-5 missiles." Meanwhile, Ali Larijani said Iran was honored to help Gaza's Hamas with material and military aspects. There are roughly 35,000 Palestinian militants in Gaza. Israel, which receives billions of dollars of military aid from the U.S., has a conscript army of 175,000, with 450,000 in reserve equipped with modern weapons systems including F-16 fighter bombers, Apache helicopter gunships and Merkava tanks. Pre-operation events. Several factors acted to increase tensions between Israel and Hamas. Palestinian Center for Human Rights reported 92 Israeli attacks within the 3-mile zone against Palestinian fishermen in the first half of 2012, with 43 men arrested, 18 boats confiscated and 4 times equipment damaged and confiscated. Israel has imposed a limited fishing zone, limiting Gazan fishermen to fishing within 3 nautical miles instead of the 20 stipulated in the Oslo Accords. Fishery provides Gaza with a large share of its food production and provided more than 12,000 jobs. According to Amir Hass, the Israeli Navy routinely fire on Palestinian fishermen, sometimes detaining and transferring them for a minor interrogation at the Shin Bet Security Services offices in Ashdod. According to the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, in July and August, 11 Israeli attacks took place and 2 fishermen were detained. 1 boat was confiscated. On the 28th of September 2012, Israeli soldiers entered the Gaza Strip and attacked a group of Palestinian fishermen who were fishing at the beach near the border, wounding one of them severely and wounding his brother deadly. The Israeli army said they had fired on 2 Palestinians who had entered a restricted zone near the security barrier. The family of the killed fishermen said that the fishers used to fish there and that the soldiers knew who they were and used to watch the Palestinian fishermen. In one of 11 other attacks in September, the Israeli Navy reportedly tried to drown 2 fishing boats. In October, PCHR documented 11 Israeli attacks against fishermen in which 8 fishermen were arrested while fishing approximately 2 miles off the shore. 2 fishing boats and equipment were confiscated. Also in October 2012, there were several mutual Israeli-Palestinian attacks, each a response to a previous attack by the other side. Palestinian farmers accused Israeli forces of opening fire on them and on local and international activists while they harvested olives near the border in the northern Gaza Strip. Israel said the army had no record of an attack in that area. Palestinian groups planted bombs alongside the border and attacked Israeli farmers with rockets. According to a summary by Shin Bet, 92 separate attacks occurred in October 2012, with 171 rockets and mortar shells fired against Israel. Gazan groups alleged retaliation against Israeli attacks that had killed or wounded civilians and militants alike. An arms factory in Khartoum, Sudan, alleged to have participated in arms smuggling to Hamas, exploded on the 23rd of October 2012. The Israeli government refused to either confirm or deny its involvement, though the explosion was widely believed to be a long-range attack by the Israeli Air Force. On the 24th of October, after a week in which dozens of rockets struck Israel and Israel conducted strikes against militant targets in Gaza, 80 rockets and mortars were fired from the Gaza Strip into southern Israel over a 24-hour period. 32 missiles struck the Lachish region and 28 the western Negev. A rocket strike on the agricultural area of the Eshkol region severely wounded 2 Thai workers. Earlier that day, 3 members of a Palestinian rocket-launching squad had been killed by airstrikes, and Israeli tanks had returned fire at launching sites in Gaza. Hamas promised to continue carrying the rifle until the liberation of Palestine and the defeat of the occupation. On the 25th of October, a ceasefire was allegedly negotiated by Egypt, but the existence of any truce was disputed both by Israeli and Palestinian officials. Although aggression continued in the following days, there were no more casualties on either side until the 2nd of November. On the 2nd of November, a 22-year-old Palestinian who, according to the IEDs, was suspected of attempting to place an explosive device on the Gaza-Israel border, was seriously wounded on Friday morning by Israeli tank fire. According to the IDF, he had been suspected of attempting to place an explosive device on the Gaza-Israel border. On the 5th of November, Israeli soldiers shot and killed a 20-year-old Palestinian man who approached a fence near Gaza's side of the border with Israel, reportedly ignoring warning shots and instructions to leave the area. Palestinians said that the man was unarmed, suffered from mental issues, and was constantly on medication. His relatives later said that he had approached the border before, and that at those times, Israeli soldiers used to take him back to Gazan authorities. On the 5th of November, a Palestinian roadside bomb exploded and Israeli soldiers were injured. On the 7th of November, the armed wing of the Hamas movement and the Islamic Jihad group fired a volley of rockets at Israel, a day after an Israeli strike against targets in the Gaza Strip. In the Israeli strike, 1 Islamic Jihad fighter had been wounded, as well as 4 children at a suspected rocket launch area. It also damaged a mosque and a water tower. On the 8th of November, the IDF made a short-range incursion into Gaza after finding more bombs along the border, leading to a gunfight with the Popular Resistance Committees. During the clash, a 13-year-old Palestinian boy was killed. Palestinians claimed that his death occurred by machine gun fire, either from IDF helicopters or tanks that took part in the incident. Later that day, Palestinian militants detonated an explosives-packed tunnel they had dug on the border, wounding 4 Israeli soldiers. Hamas's military wing claimed responsibility for the blast, stating that it was in response to the killing of the boy. According to Arutz Sheva, 2 Qassam rockets were fired into Israel on the 9th of November, exploding on open ground. On the 10th of November, militants fired an anti-tank missile at an IDF jeep on routine patrol near Israel's side of the border. 4 soldiers were wounded, one of whom was in critical condition following the attack. The IDF shelled the source of the fire and pre-chosen targets in the Sajia area. 4 teenagers, aged 16 to 18, were killed by an Israeli airstrike in a sports stadium while they played soccer. Gaza militants then fired at least 30 rockets and several mortar shells into southern Israel. The color red siren was sounded in Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gan Yavne, and surrounding areas, causing Israelis within 7 kilometers of the Gaza Strip to remain near protected areas. The Gan Yavne Regional Council cancelled school because of the rocket barrage. The sides continued to exchange fire for several days after the incident. Palestinian militants fired more than 100 rockets, striking homes in Israeli cities, one landing near a school. Several Israelis were wounded by shrapnel in a barrage designed to coincide with the morning commuter work. 2 people were injured when their car sustained a direct hit. Schools across southern Israel were closed. The mayor of Beersheba, Ruvik Danilovich, explained, "We have experienced hits on our education institutions in the past. 40,000 children will remain at home today because of the attack that hit us out of the blue." Israel carried out further airstrikes in Gaza. 6 Palestinian militants were killed, including 1 militant belonging to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. In the days before the operation, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Ehud Barak said that Israel's reaction would come at the appropriate time. Quote, However, following a cabinet meeting in the morning before the operation, Minister Benny Begin said that the current exchange of hostilities seems to be over. Quote, According to one Israeli analyst, these mixed messages, the expected diplomatic repercussions from Egypt and the risks of a war on the eve of the Israeli elections were 3 factors designed to foster a laissez-faire atmosphere for Gaza's Palestinian leaders. On the 12th of November, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad officials indicated a willingness to discuss a ceasefire. A PIJ spokesman said, "The ball is in Israel's court. The resistance factions will observe Israelis' behavior on the ground and will act accordingly." Quote, However, Palestinians fired 12 rockets at Israel throughout the day. A factory and a house were hit, and 3 civilians were wounded. Israel asked the UN Security Council to condemn the rocket attacks, with Minister Barak saying that Israel would not accept the harm to daily life of our civilians. Gershon Baskin, an Israeli peace activist who was the mediator between Israel and Hamas in the negotiations that resulted in the release of Gilad Shalit, reported that hours before the strike that killed Ahmed Jabari, Jabari had received a draft of a long-term ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. According to Reuven Pedazer, the negotiations had been conducted with the consent of Ehud Barak, and a week before the strike IDF officials had asked to be briefed on the progress, but permission for the briefing was denied. Operation Timeline. Ceasefire. The 2 main parties, Israel and Hamas, refused to deal with each other directly. Instead, negotiations were conducted through intermediaries. Officials from the US and Egypt acted as the facilitators. Attempts at ceasefire. Indirect negotiations between Israel and Hamas were mediated by Egypt. Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi predicted the negotiations would lead to positive results very soon. By contrast, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, after meeting with Netanyahu, said that the process would take place in the days ahead. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon also met with Netanyahu to attempt to end the violence. Turkish foreign ministers and Arab League diplomats were sent to Gaza to promote a truce between the warring parties. According to reports in Cairo, Israel made 6 demands for a ceasefire, no violence for a period of more than 15 years, no smuggling or transfer of arms to Gaza, end of all rocket fire and attacks on Israeli soldiers. Israel reserves the right to attack terrorists in case of an attack or of a potential attack. Israeli Gaza crossings will remain closed. Egypt's politicians must guarantee the above demands. Hamas's demands for a ceasefire included the lifting of the naval blockade of Gaza, international community guarantees for the cessation of targeted killings, an end to IDF cross-border raids, and the cessation of attack. Hamas leader Khaled Mashal additionally wanted international guarantees for the lifting of the blockade. Ceasefire of 21 November. On 21 November, Mohammed Kamel Amra, the Egyptian foreign minister, and Hillary Clinton, the U.S. Secretary of State, announced a ceasefire that would take effect at 2100 GMT+2. The agreement distributed by the Egyptian presidency reads, Khaled Mashal, the exiled leader of Hamas, thanked Egypt for mediating the ceasefire and claimed that Israel had been defeated. He also praised Iran for providing militants with financing and arms. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that Operation Pillar of Defense had been successful and thanked U.S. President Obama for his unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself. Post-ceasefire incidents. An explosion took place in Gaza in unclear circumstances after the ceasefire. No casualties were reported. A Palestinian man was killed and 3 others wounded by stray gunfire as gunmen in Gaza fired in the air to celebrate the ceasefire deal. In the hour after the ceasefire was declared, 12 rockets were launched from Gaza into Israel. All of them landed in open areas. Air raid sirens sounded in Eshkol, Dero, Hof Ashkelon, Ashdod, Kiryat Malakah and Shari HaNegev. One rocket over Ashdod was intercepted by the Iron Dome. The day after the ceasefire, Israeli soldiers shot dead a Palestinian farmer and wounded another 19. The survivors, who thought the terms of the truce allowed them access to the land, said they ventured into the Israeli-established buffer zone inside Gaza's border to pray while climbing on the Israeli defense wall. The Palestinian ambassador to the UN, Riyad Mansour, complained to the organization that the attack was a violation of the ceasefire. On 28 November, Israel opened fire on 2 fishing boats off the coast of Gaza and detained 9 Gazan fishermen. According to Mahfouz al-Kabriti, the head of Gaza's fishing association, the fishermen were 6 miles off the coast, the limit within which, as Israel agreed in the ceasefire deal, Gazan fishermen could sail. According to the Israeli Navy, the fishermen had ventured beyond the area designated as allowable for fishing, and did not heed requests to return to the area before being detained. On 30 November, another young Gazan man, 21-year-old Mahmoud Jaran, was shot dead by Israeli forces in Rafah. According to MAN news agency, Israeli forces had already violated the ceasefire several times by the beginning of December 2012 by firing at Palestinian farmers. On 1 December, Islamic Jihad warned that more Israeli violations of a ceasefire deal would move the group to respond.